Ah si. Si, c'est bon.
Bon, désolé pour ces petits...
Well, sorry for this technical issue, but hello to all of you. We can start this round table about the safety of a cloud environment with us, 4 experts, and I'll start with the latest, Julien Bachelet. He is with Hermes, Frédéric from the group CISO with retail, Pascal Domez, CTO specialized with Atos, and Pierre Connor, Cloud Security Officer with Prestaria. And my name is Constance Ménard from Deloitte, and I'm in charge of training to cybersecurity. And as we do all now to secure a cloud, it's not just for that, it's because it's about to protect the critical asset of the company and also of those customers. Hence, we're trying to understand the content of cloud security and to understand the issue it might raise and the solutions that are brought. I hope there is a translation. I hope you can hear me. Preparing this roundtable, Eric and I were surprised, or I mean, we thought that as we are repeating quite some things about the shared responsibility into the cloud, and we thought it was really harassing and people were annoyed. But Julia said, no, it's not yet that clear. We still need some explanation. So could you make things clear and say why, to your opinion? Yes, indeed, it's not as simple as that, because there's quite some change every day, and there are still some things we do discover, be it contractual aspects, clauses in the cloud security 4 or 5 years ago. It was about the choice of one provider to another cloud provider. Things we couldn't anticipate, we couldn't see, and it's not really what we expected. And we get back to the security function, and it's quite often the cloud service provider. It's done by them. It's getting more clear, and there are some tools allowing us to understand better the limit of that cloud service provider's responsibility. Where does it stop, either from a legal point of view, financial point of view as well, as you need to be equipped with new equipment. And it's still not simple, but I think things get more clear thanks to that maturity that is getting ahead. Well, I think as well that it's not really positive to have that marketing story by the cloud providers telling us people get to cloud and it's security. There is security. Why to work on security? Because cloud, it is safe. So it's not that long time ago I heard that kind of story. So the marketing story is not really helping to make things clear and to get aware of that responsibility model. It's not yet done. No mic. So it's about visibility on the infrastructure, and there is a lack of clarity in the cloud. There is no global visibility, and that is really constraining either about responsibility, but also about what one can do. And this is a new discovery in the logs as well, and it is exactly a kind of instruction. We can see that with Glasgow. How can you get control and visibility on that kind of environment? So we get back to some solutions, but it's true. We need to gain into visibility. It needs to be clear. To have control, yes, there are different aspects. Getting back to what we said before, it's about to discover the limits of the cloud offer. And this is something we get thanks to the tracker, either prem solutions, but also about the answer provided to incidents. A first critical issue, it is to have a visibility on the logs at a capacity of collect and retaining data. These are things we do discover a long time with cloud solutions. In recent years, many companies have become more mature regarding the answers and the rapid reaction. It's complex to have an overview on the activity of the cloud solutions. And also another limit, which is about the trust in the cloud service provider regarding exclusivity and integration. This is the subject regarding visibility with a potential for solutions. Yesterday, talking about positive things, it's that we were lucky somehow when using cloud, and that is that you get a rebilling. Cloud service providers do know our equipment and hardware. Hence, you get a better vision on the infrastructure used within the cloud. And that's good. So the adapted tools to listen to this, to study, and to understand these tools as well. Yes, indeed. Well, you could just to bow over your and limit yourself to your bill and think it is sufficient. No, there are a lot of data, many details, and you need to proceed to a right understanding of what you get on your bill in order to take advantage of the visibility that a cloud service provider is giving. Usually, it starts with FinOps, when it's about to optimize the cloud consumption. Something you said yesterday, and you can see that there is an issue of asset management, of control, of log, and as such, you get all the ideas and all the issues about security. Something that doesn't change, but it's the way you deal with it to have the same security high-level policy, a high-level policy, and when you get into the concepts, guides, processes, implementation, then it changes a lot. Yes, quite correct. Quite correct. No, yes, it does. It's true. It's true. Even recently, I got a discussion with insurance company, and they asked me, what's my cloud security policy? I don't have. It's the same safety security, whether you are on-prem or on cloud. In both cases, you need to proceed to path management, access control. Everybody, you need to do that with passwords. It's not different from elsewhere. To me, it is about the what and not about the how. It's into the how that you get into a different level of details. And of course, it's not about access control or network segmentation as we were talking about containers. It's not to be implemented the same way on the on-prem or on cloud. Yes, indeed. The security principles, whether it be on-prem hardware or in the cloud, will be linked to a risk analysis. It has been identified, a threat or your essential organs, a security policy to be deployed. But here it is disruptive, technologic-wise. Hence, it is a different implementation pathway, and we need more adapted solutions that is in line with the new consumption and the management of hardware. So we keep on the same policies about something that is to be applied within the cloud. But how is it to be used? Which are the means to use with more adapted solutions today? I have got a few examples. There was a discussion with a client, and this person was switching to automated services and to containers. In fact, he asked me, I need to know my vulnerabilities in my security policy. I need to know that, how to scan these vulnerabilities, the workloads which are on only for a few seconds and fade away. So you need to know what you don't need to scan. You need to identify the vulnerabilities. Hence, you move the issue. Looking at what had to be done, it's to get the identification to scan the repository, its templates, its deployment ways, the libraries, and everything that will be deployed automatically. If you know your template, you know what you are going to deploy, you know that the workload will not get away from the template, and you have to ensure that, then you can identify the vulnerabilities in the prod and your vulnerabilities. That's the shift left security. Your issue will move ahead. You will act differently. That's the to talk about policy. It is the same way, but the way to treat with this, it's to evolve. Stream upwards, and thereafter to monitor, to change the monitoring policy and this approach of automation, because to be able to monitor, you've got to monitor and components you can deploy in a few seconds with a life cycle which is very short. So you need to detection policy. Hence, you get through a totally different environment, another dimension. Hence, you need another automation policy regarding the cloud hardware. And don't keep the same policy. You're going to detect the same incidents, and we do cover the same problems, but it's about how to get there. You can talk about access management. But before that, to get back to that issue, the subject of visibility, and that's in line with what you just said. It is essential, working on security, the first thing you need to focus upon, and that is what is going to be protected. Cloud issue, and this already for some time, ever since it exists, is how the user do consume the cloud apps, and there are quite some tools and techniques as an access security broker, and as such, through the traffic analysis, you can identify the cloud services used by these users, and that is quite, let's say, has been done for years. And we can get back on that. It is something we introduced quite fast in 2017 as we started with Office 365. Regarding cloud, I'd say we have got some tools have become mature, which is CSP. So from Cloud Security Posture Management, in order to get to know what is used by the production teams, by the SecOps teams in cloud, regarding the cloud components. And typically I've got a story about China. China, it's quite a major market and has developed strongly in recent years, which is good for us. But that market get extended with a communication channel, which is WeChat. And there was a lot of demand, transformation-wise. All teams have done the monitoring, and we introduced the Azure infrastructure and also a few OVMs. To go with that, 4 years ago, we did the risk analysis, audits, and we tried to follow up like the old-fashioned way, or IT teams in China. A year ago, we thought we need to feed that because China has started to develop infra cloud in SaaS components or PaaS components. And it's important to gain into visibility and also the capacity regarding control on the security policy and the way it was implemented concretely, technically wise. And in China, at that point in time we implemented the CSPM tool, we noticed there are not 10 machines, but 250 machines, only in a few years. And have not been so transparent regarding the increase. And there were some issues configuration-wise. As such, we have been reorganizing things and proved positive by providing the tools in order to allow the cloud engineers to adapt their configuration and to be compliant with the security policy. On infra-cloud, I do call that the volatility of the configuration. It is changing, and there are still production engineers doing a lot of things manually as they were adapting the parameters the old-fashioned way. And the trend, it is to have the template of the cloud components with infra as code. You know, the risk of the change of one click and a wrong parameter committed in a development pipeline. As such, typically without tools, you have to face a lot and major risks. According to us, the CSPM and the visibility and the risk control in real time, it is paramount. It has really become paramount. Yes, I pick it up. That's a specificity of cloud. As we're getting into the IT industrial time, we need some security tools in order to treat with security tools at the industrial times. You need to have control of the process from A to Z. You get that example of a click. We could have experienced an incident some time ago, but we have become aware it's just one click. And it could have been really serious and severe for us. It was something forgotten. One case with a click. I was hesitating about access identity, isn't it? But yes, indeed, if you're thinking about this responsibility model, whatever the model you consume in the cloud, there's something you are in charge of, and that's the safety of the data. It might be sufficient or not. And the identity access management, the provider doesn't know your clients, and he is not going to provide the authorization. So the identity of access, it is really unnecessary when you start with cloud. As from my point of view, to deal with cloud, and that's what we're all doing, without access identity control, that's a major error, and that is really a major risk. Yes, you're right. We're talking a lot about this keyword, zero trust. And somehow it's likewise. We have switched to a new model, and a model we were protecting ourselves within some limits. Everything inside was validated to the IAM, and there are good reasons for that. EM was not as much taken into account as it should have been in the hardware. Nowadays, you cannot do that. The EM has gained in importance, according to me. It is the tool of control and the protection point to be protected most important. Or data, well, just a small error might cause an issue. An error of permission, and all the data is accessible. So it's really an issue, hence the maintenance and long-term maintenance for a sane situation. And you know that life in company might change. So to keep all of this, it is something that might not be neglected. Yes, as you said, someone retiring or leaving the company, we needed in the past a kind of a badge or whatsoever, a second parameter. You needed to be in the right place. Nowadays, you can be all over the globe and get access to the 365. And the only thing which is important is your identity. You leave the company, at that point in time, your account needs to be closed with all SaaS providers. If you do that manually, it will take quite some time. Even more today, as you were talking about the access, the AIM, what path we follow to get to access to that data. With this major crisis, telework has developed a lot. Data solutions have been implemented by different companies. Also here, it has occurred for you as well. Today, the question of access, who can get access to the data? The identity has become clearly a pillar of the safety, of the security. So, and from what point of view, from what position geographically, and there might be some users located somewhere on the earth. It's to be taken into account, but also the asset management. We get back, gain into control on that asset. And that is totally changing this approach because the limits are being pushed away. It is about an industrial scale, and you cannot keep this old-fashioned approach. Clearly, these pillars are to be taken into account today. It's just an evolution. The AIM, it's again the heart of the main pillar of your security, which is good. But Julien was talking about the CASB and access security broker with a security policy on the SaaS applies that we use, cloud security posture management to have a visibility on our hardware, on the services, on the wrong configuration, on the compliance, on the assets, and on the security control which is used. It has become quite a few databases which are not to be missed. It is not sufficient. There are certainly other things to be added. We were talking about the cloud workload protection, which is a way to protect our workload. And in the word workload, you might cover a virtual machine, a container, an application, an appliance. And so that's what we are talking about. There's an issue of vocabulary. You can also introduce the API. AIM, CSPM, SB, CWB protection, and the control of the API in some apps. And that communicates with external apps, and without forgetting the encrypting and ciphering. And that is still the case in the prem, and it is still the case in the cloud with other facets. Vasco is talking about a terminology which is hype, and that's the secure access, secure edge, in order to implement different systems to guarantee the access to these to this CASB, access control, but also a approach on firewall, which was hosted in the hardware, but the safety security environment has changed. We work on the CDM, on a whole set of security tools to implement a new access of the policy, access policy, and also location policy. And this is being applied on infrastructure with microservices, and you get the same issue and the approach of securization of the apps. Machine security as well. We're talking about the delay of some security control processes that were, of course, subcontracted, who will clean the user's traffic as compared to our infrastructure or access to cloud or web services. And on infrastructure, we are starting to have, it's not a start. There are a lot of microservices. And as such, there is a control of connectivity and infrastructures which is reported on a sidecar, a small container specialized close to the app container that is carrying the app, and that will communicate with a control plane which is central. And the sidecar will control quality of the network communication, will be filtering the control rules, and also have a SSL in order to encrypt and to cipher. But why? When we started this process of microservices, and that's a feedback I get from some customers and app teams, that are organized per function of this app had to proceed to a new design of this control, network control and security control, access control, and they all acted on their own way for the same service. And very soon we have been delegating to a central function this sidecar effect. As such, some teams could focus upon the business and on the app, and the other quality control of network and communication control could be standardized.
Once again, we're changing the scale. It's the same thing through everything. Once again, it's the same verifications, but they're done differently. But for one security team, that means that you also have to evolve when it comes to your skills and the way you do things. It's not easy. How do you see that? How do you meet this challenge of changing the skills and the teams? Well, as you said, those are new things to do with lots of new technologies. Our approach is fairly similar. We combine ops expertise with security expertise. Why? Because in my case, I think that you can't be an expert of containers, especially since they don't work exactly the same for the cloud provider, etc. So it's very complicated. And we have people in the operations team who are brilliant in that area and who may not have all the security keys. And so we create teams that combine, in a way, the skills. Rather than having a five-legged sheep, we have two half sheep, one with two legs and one with three. And we combine the expertise, and that's how we increase our expertise in order to implement security well. Well, let's talk about humans, beings, and transformations. That's one of the pivotal issues in taking over the infra-cloud area that took place a few months ago. As Fred said, we focused a great deal on security and ops teams that work together. We talked about the DevOps ops. It works for the cloud, but it works for a lot of other things as well. I was talking about the tool earlier that, well, you don't do security with tools, but it can be a way of bringing two different teams together to converge on the same objective, and sometimes a platform approach works well. That's what we did in an event. After we found that we are often bothered by implementation of new cloud solutions rather than the techniques. I think the cloud techniques minimize the skills that are required, and the systems operators that are used to working with infrastructure for years, working with physical infrastructure in the data centers, well, when they're asked from overnight to go from containers to Amazon, it doesn't work well. Sometimes it does, but they don't really enjoy the benefits of the cloud. The advantages of the cloud are absolutely overlooked in such cases. So one of the keys, that's where we have lots of difficulties to grapple with, is that control mastery is pretty good for the production operations team. Once again, we improve our security, which isn't different very much from the legacy operations and the cloud operations. We talked a lot about microservices for container routing, and this it's easier to. It's not easy to do an RDI for a machine that exists for only a few hours. You have to work around it in order to achieve the same security aims. It's not the same as when you're working with containers, and that's one of the major challenges that we have when we're using the cloud. in any event, in my experience, a good thing is to bring the teams closer to operations so they understand what's going on better. One thing that we haven't talked about is that you increase the power of your actions. I learned recently there's a lack of security resources, and you can't do everything. And working with people in ops enables us to increase the strength of our operations. We're not going to get a five-legged sheep, as was said. We bring the security expertise to the ops teams, and then we can move forward. Well, when you're deploying infrastructure, we're changing our normal infrastructure. We're going from ASCOM more to the developers. And once again, we're going to apply the same security teams. How are we going to implement the codes? We're going to implement the good practices. It's not a new rule. You apply good practices. You do things that enable you to deploy things. The main threat is how the recovery of this information in order to get the codes and to destroy infrastructure. So we're talking about operational teams, as you said, Fred. How do we give them these good security practices to overcome these threats? Well, what are the keys? What are the essential elements of working with the cloud so that it's successful, so it's secure? I think one of the things is, as I mentioned earlier, human change and expertise. This works more or less well depending on how clear your strategy is. You're not going to the cloud just for a few, because it's easier for a few apps or it's faster. You have to have a comprehensive vision, rather, something that is built up, a strategy in an ideal world with the CISO. One of the things is to have very clear ideas as to what you can get out of the clouds and the eligibility of certain workloads. Some people tend to leave once the door is open. They tend to have the entire workload migrate to the cloud when it doesn't make sense to do that. So maybe we should put one thing forward. The strategy. You have to set a strategy to set a direction for the men and women who are going to be involved in the transformation. You said in an ideal world, in a perfect world, you should have, we talked about certain basic solutions. In an ideal world, all of those should be in place before you migrate to the cloud. Now, for the SaaS applications, we know that that's a dream, it's utopian, or the assessor should be involved from the very beginning and aware of the risks after checking his or her own needs. But I think those three pillars, the CDM, are necessary as early as possible. Let me come back to the fact of thinking on the industrial scale. We've not talked about this a lot, but the cloud, we also use security solutions that are in the cloud. Like any function in an enterprise, we have to use computer services, and we too are going to rely on the flexibility, the advantages of the cloud in order to support this industrial scale. At Auchan, we have AIM, and the structures are not in our facilities. The world of skills or security skills means that you don't always have everything internally. You don't always have the expertise or the number of people that you need, or the people of the right quality in order to manage all of that. And you have to delegate. You have to delegate the sources or the services or outsource them. Well, that's indeed, I'm not talking just about the security, I'm talking generally. If you're talking about 365 and Google, which are mail providers, you don't have to have teams to manage the mail, to keep things up to date, etc. So you go on to another scale. You do the same thing for security. Those are huge challenges. You have to increase your visibility on that scale, and it's becoming more and more complicated when you're talking about multi-cloud solutions or platforms. It's becoming AIM is more and more crucial in that environment. We're coming back once again to AIM. When you have to increase your visibility, you have to raise your profile. The CRM is one way of getting this higher profile and doing away with dealing with countless other tools. You can, otherwise, you're going to be in a nightmare situation. Today we have this consumption of new services. Otherwise, it's going to be a free-for-all. And you're going to see at the end of each month more and more higher and higher bills and more chaos. Now, one of the problems with this strategy is you have to know what you want to do. We've tried to advise clients with their mail classification to understand what the strategic data are. We talked about delegating certain data to the cloud providers. You have, as we said yesterday, you have to choose a partner and you can trust him up to a certain point. Beyond that point, there are data or information or things, maybe 1% or 5% of our data, which are too sensitive for the level of trust that you have in your provider. Now, you may have 100% trust in them, but you have to know to what extent you can trust in your provider. You have to understand that before you transform things and before your data are scattered all over the place. That's what you said. Risk-driven approach is very important. You have a provider that's handling cafeteria data or sensitive data, and they're not the same things. And we talked about the incident management because there's interdependence with our providers, and whereas in the past with the logs, we had the logs and they were available to us. Now, when we want to do detailed analysis, you need a certain amount of time to repatriate them. We had the case of an incident in our place. The box that was ticked, when we discovered that, it took us 10 minutes to discover it. On the other hand, we had to estimate the impact, and there was no impact in our premises, but it took us 5 months to recover all the logs over a bit more of a year. And the problem was, the cloud provider was a company like any others, and they don't keep all their logs in their servers ready and available. They're archived, and they have to get things out of the archives, and they have to transfer them to us. And then, of course, you have the problem of volume, because when you have a high volume, this can't be done just over the internet. And, of course, that was billed as well. I don't know if you want to tackle any other issues. Otherwise, we'll go to the question and answer session. Perhaps to wrap up, what came out of this discussion is that the concept of security remain the same when it comes to the cloud. It's more how to implement them that will change when you're talking about the cloud. The main point that we also mentioned is the problem of the increasing skills of the teams when they're working with the cloud. The teams themselves have to adapt. They have to adjust. And then a point raised by Frederick a lot is the industrial scale, the change of scale when you switch to the cloud, and then the consequences for security breaches are even more dramatic. So those are the conclusions. I don't know if you have any questions regarding the various panelists' remarks. Yes? Good afternoon. I'm Nelly. I have a little question. I would like to know how you approach data access and their securization in the Cloud Act of the United States? That's a very good question. We were indeed saying that we weren't able to talk about the regulatory aspects here, and they're huge when talking about the cloud, risk acceptance, and the level of trust that you give to your cloud service provider. One of the problems is data control and the confidentiality, and how far how confidentiality goes when you give things to a cloud service provider. We all have risk maps for a company that mean that we can accept data storage abroad more or less easily. There are some more regulated spheres that was a hobble on going to the cloud. We do that by confiding with the RGTPD. With Hermes, and we have a high level of risk to manage, and storing a certain number of amount of data at the CSP, an American CSP, is something that we accept in our strategy in choosing the solutions between 2007 and 2020. The question did come up very clearly. I'm not going to say that it was a problem for our sovereignty. I'm looking for another word, but is it something that we would accept? In our case, we did. And I know that this is part of the discussion that can be very lengthy when you're trying to choose how to manage your risks before the contracts even come up with your legal services. Here we have the example of the United States, which is less problematic than China or Russia, which also have very strict regulatory requirements and force us sometimes to look at our SI architecture and data storage. Sometimes we have to do so in advance. For those of you who are lucky enough to work in Russia, you know that you're supposed to store all of your data on Russian territory before transferring them elsewhere, with, of course, consent. Using the cloud solutions that are available, that are hosted in Europe at an American CSP. You see, you have more and more problems, and things are even worse with China. We think that in a few years, China is going to apply the same requirements when it comes to personal data, private data first of all. We're not all equal. To add to that, Hermes is a large company. Auchan is very large as well, and we're lucky enough to have IT lawyers who can help us and advise us. And we, of course, changed things at Auchan because we had problems. When the regulations changed, we changed as well. And we saw that we couldn't work with some providers anymore. I'm not a lawyer. I know that there are other mechanisms to abide by laws and regulations. So we will comply with the regulations, of course. And we will adjust to the regulations that exist in the various countries. When you talk about sovereignty, are you going to remain legitimate? It's not a problem for us to work with an American editor for most of our data. It's interesting because we had the discussion with a lot of our large international clients who work in the United States as well, who say we want to comply with. We don't have a problem. The problem is that we don't want a difficult to assess risk. We don't want the cloud service provider to provide the data without my being aware of it. I have to be aware of it. How do we do this? But we assist them on the basis of two pillars, AIM and encryption. And we add additional layers at the provider level, and we keep everything under our control as much as possible. And through that, we can give the client more control, but to the detriment of certain functions. that have more or less interest for their operations. So by definition, we mask the data to the cloud service provider. We can do that. The Salesforce data are encrypted, and the sales reps will see everything clearly and perfectly. And we're going to encrypt certain things, for example, names, last names, telephone numbers, addresses, things like that. So engineer will see the encrypted forms. And if we encrypt the figures, it won't be possible to look at the opportunity costs and things like that. The English thing, in English, you say there's no free lunch. You don't get something for nothing. A lot of wonderful things are done and said about that. I don't have anything to add to that when we talk about risk, and I think we're going to open the floor to other questions because I think that's the best way to proceed. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. You answered my question partially. I'm Charles something or another. The interpreter didn't catch. Unfortunately, I'm a lawyer. So there were some things that maybe we shouldn't have said. You talked about the technical advantages of the cloud, transferring and sharing information with a provider who is a third party to the system when it comes to cybersecurity. So I've taken note of that. You've talked about conformity of compliance with laws and regulations. Most of us are starting to become familiar with the regulation, etc. We're even talking. Now I have a more perverse question. Have you already negotiated contracts with your cloud providers? Yes. Yes, Mr. Auchan. But do you think today we're in a situation when anybody can be in a situation when they're not absolutely dependent on somebody for cybersecurity? I'm maybe being polemical. No, not at all. Are we all equal? No, we are not all equal. Let me step in the shoes of an SME. You're going to have general terms of sale. That's what's great in the cloud. Before with cloud, clients had needs, we expressed our needs, and we found a provider to meet them. With the cloud, we've changed the level of responsibility. Cloud provider says, I can do this. It's standard at my place, and it's up to you to analyze the risk and to determine whether it meets your needs or not. So that's how we work. You can, of course, bargain over contracts, etc. But even if we're Auchan, there are technical elements, there are clauses that we cannot negotiate. They're not going to recreate a cloud just for us. Or they could, but we're not going to pay for it. On the other hand, we have true risk analysis approach. I would be more at ease to talk about security, but of course, certain levels of risk, certain elements of risk are included. Now, for example, the CSR and the legal field are taken into account, and we sign in due knowledge of what we're signing. We had a discussion with one of our major cloud service providers concerning the level of security that we are going to accept. They proposed things standard for us. Things worked very well, but we felt that the level of security remained too low. We wondered a great deal about this, and the central management took a decision to do certain things and not do other things. So we always come back to this idea of risk. As you said, we are in a contractual relationship. It's a matter of trust. A contract, well, when you're no longer alone, you have to trust more or less in a third party. When we were on premise, we trusted blindly in our CISO, who could do whatever he or she wanted. And should I, or the administrator, should I trust in my administrator more, or Or should I trust in somebody in the cloud who for Auchan is simply a number? I would tend to answer your question directly. No, not yet. We don't negotiate a lot. These are practically standard contracts. We're not as big as Auchan, and if very clearly, the number of we have very little margin for negotiating contracts with most of our CS cloud service providers. The main thing is to take an enlightened decision and to know what you're putting your fingers into. One of the major problems behind that is the independence or the dependence that setting up installing Office 365 involves. For every quarter, you have more and more features that generate more and more data. Going back in time would be very difficult today, and the first impact that would be monetary. The bill that we would have to pay after 3 years would be horrendous. It would be extremely complicated as well to do. We're ending with 365, and now we're going on to something else. It's a huge problem. No, it really is a huge problem, and unfortunately, it's not great to put it this way, but we don't always really have a choice. If I look at WeChat in China, either we're going to tackle the Chinese market with the terms set by the Chinese, and we'll accept that the data that transit by through the platforms are supervised by Chinese rules, and we know what the links are between Tencent, the editor, and the Chinese government, or we cut ourselves off from a part of our client, a huge portion on a large market. It's the same thing when it comes to Facebook. A few years ago, we wondered about setting up a clienteling solution and using Facebook for that. And at the end of the day, though we saw what the risks were when it came to controlling the data, and we counterbalanced the risk with the loss of opportunity for developing our company and our turnover. And for many companies, it's often a contract that you simply agree to. Based on our past experience, I know SIGGRAPH some time ago tried to weigh more heavily on this by bringing a number of companies together to have more clout in dealing with Microsoft, and maybe for certain specific points, setting pricing and billing, that could work if we banded together in order to deal with Microsoft or other CSPs. You have to look at things as the glass being half full or half empty. The state initiatives, European initiatives, EU initiatives might be able to orient things. Well, there's something else to be added, because we're often focused on big cloud service providers, and you really have to look at the clients with the small CSPs, because a one-person company can be a CSP. We work with startups, and it's absolutely necessary to look at contracts with them. It's easier to negotiate contracts with them as well. But we're also supporting smaller companies that are working with Auchan. You said that you're doing cloud services and you're responsible, but we tell them that we're not happy with a line that says we are responsible for the cloud service. We're going to dig deeper into the contract, and we're going to help the startups to get them to rise to the right level of security as well in their contracts and in their operations. There's time for a last question if there are any other questions. No? All right. Well, the last word. Well, thank you. I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank all four of you. And that's it. Thank you.